The water is black. Not dark blue, not murky green, but black as oil, thick with mud and secrets. Above the surface, the remains of bombed warehouses cast jagged shadows across Liverpool's dockyards. Below, in the cold November water of 1944, a diver descends into silence. His gloved hand reaches forward, fingers spread wide, searching. He cannot see. The silt is too thick, the night too complete. All he has is touch. And somewhere in that darkness, buried in 2 feet of harbor mud, lies a German magnetic mine that failed to detonate when it struck bottom 3 weeks ago. His job is to find it before the morning shift arrives, before the longshoremen return, before cargo ships try to dock, and the whole thing goes up in a blast that could take half the pier with it. This is not the war you see in newsreels. This is the war fought in silence, in darkness, by men who cannot scream even when their hands brush against death itself. If you want to understand what courage really looks like, if you want to know the story's history almost forgot, then stay with us. Hit that subscribe button right now, because what you're about to hear will change how you think about bravery forever. The briefing room smells of tobacco and damp wool. 3 divers sit on wooden benches while Lieutenant Commander Hayes spreads a hand-drawn map across the table. His finger taps a section of King's Dock marked with a red X. The bombing raid happened on the 16th. Luftwaffe dropped incendiaries first, then followed with high explosive and delayed action bombs. Some went off immediately. Some went off 2 days later, when salvage crews were pulling bodies from the rubble. And some, Hayes says, his voice flat and tired, some are still down there waiting. The Admiralty needs the dock operational by Friday. Convoys are stacking up in the Atlantic. Ships need refitting. Ammunition needs loading. The war does not pause because Liverpool's harbor is full of unexploded ordnance. So tonight, under blackout conditions, the 3 of them will go down and sweep the bottom. They'll work in rotation, 20 minutes each, using hand signals and rope tugs because even the slightest sound can travel through water and vibrate a magnetic sensor just enough to complete circuit. Hayes does not sugarcoat it. 2 men died doing this work in Portsmouth last month. A parachute mine shifted in the current and crushed 1 diver against a dock piling. The other tried to surface too fast when he realized what was happening and ruptured both eardrums and part of his lung. They pull the bodies up, Hayes says, and then they send someone else down. Because the alternative is that the harbor stays closed and men die on beachheads in France because the ammunition never arrives. The equipment is basic but effective. Heavy canvas diving suits lined with rubber, copper helmets with small faceplate windows that fog over within minutes underwater. Rebreather systems that recycle exhaled air, keeping bubbles to a minimum because even bubbles can give away position if enemy reconnaissance is watching the harbor at night. Lead-soled boots that weigh 30 pounds each, designed to keep a man anchored in current. Thick leather gloves that are supposed to protect against cuts, but mostly just make everything harder to feel. And a simple tool belt carrying a probe rod, a small wrench, wire cutters, and a waterproof pouch holding detonator pins that might, if handled correctly, render a mine temporarily safe. The water temperature in November hovers around 48 degrees Fahrenheit. Cold enough that after 30 minutes a man's hands stop working properly. Cold enough that hypothermia becomes as dangerous as any bomb. They check each other's gear in silence, tugging straps, testing valves, running through the checklist that has kept them alive for 8 months of this work. No one speaks about fear. No one needs to. It is there in the way fingers fumble with buckles, in the way eyes avoid direct contact, in the nervous clearing of throats. Then the helmet goes on, the faceplate is sealed, and the world reduces to the sound of your own breathing and the thud of your heartbeat in your ears. The latter is slick with algae. The first man, Corporal Davies, climbs down slowly, 1 hand on the rail, 1 on his air hose. The water rises past his boots, past his waist, past his shoulders. Then his helmet goes under, and he is gone, swallowed by the black harbor, and the 2 men on the pier watch the bubbles trace his path and wonder if he will come back up. The descent is disorienting. Gravity pulls, but the suit adds buoyancy that fights it, creating a strange, weightless struggle. Visibility is 0. The faceplate shows nothing but murk, like looking into a bucket of motor oil. Davies taps the signal line twice. Message received on deck. He is down. His feet touch bottom and sink 6 inches into soft sediment. The texture is wrong. Not sand, not gravel, but a slick organic muck that could be industrial waste or decomposed cargo or something far worse that he has not let himself think about. He stands still for a moment, letting his other senses adjust. The water presses against the suit from all sides, a constant squeezing presence. Cold seeps through the rubber at the wrists and neck. He can hear the hiss of the rebreather, the gurgle of water moving past the helmet, and beneath it all a low metallic groan that might be the dock pilings settling, or might be something else. The briefing said the mine is approximately 30 feet from the pier, near where a crane collapsed during the raid. He is supposed to move in a grid pattern, sweeping left to right, using the probe rod to check for hard objects beneath the mud. But theory and practice are different things. In practice, every step is a blind commitment. In practice, the mud sucks at his boots and he has to pull hard to free each foot, and every time he does there is a moment of imbalance when he could fall forward onto whatever is buried there. In practice, his gloved hands are shaking. He extends the probe rod and pushes it down into the sediment. It goes in 2 feet before hitting something solid. His pulse spikes. He probes around it, tracing dimensions. Long, maybe 8 feet. Could be a steel beam from the crane. Could be a shipping container. Could be an unexploded 1,000-pound bomb. He pulls a hand signal, one tug on the lifeline. Possible contact. On deck, the standby diver notes the position on the map. Davies moves laterally, 5 feet to the left, and begins again. The cold is getting worse. His fingers feel thick and clumsy inside the gloves. He finds another object, this one smaller, cylindrical. He runs his hand along it slowly, feeling for fins, for any shape that suggests ordnance. It is smooth. No detonator housing. Probably just a section of pipe. He marks it mentally and continues. 20 feet from the pier now. The current picks up here, where the open channel meets the dock, pulling at his suit, trying to push him off balance. He braces one leg against a piling and sweeps the probe rod in an arc metal. Definitely metal. And the shape is wrong. Too symmetrical. Too purposeful. He freezes. His breathing sounds incredibly loud inside the helmet. Slowly, so slowly that it feels like moving through syrup, he lowers himself to his knees. The mud rises to his chest. He reaches out with both hands, fingers spread, and touches it. The surface is cold and smooth, slightly convex. He traces the circumference. Roughly 3 feet in diameter. Rib casing. And there, at the top, a raised housing that can only be one thing. Detonator. He has found it. And now comes the hard part. The training is clear. Do not pull. Do not lift. Do not apply sudden pressure. Magnetic mines are designed to detonate when a ship's metal hull passes overhead, completing a circuit between the mine's magnetic field and the ferrous metal of the vessel. But they can also be fitted with anti-handling devices, small secondary charges that trigger if the mine is moved or tilted beyond a certain degree. There is no way to know, in the dark, in the mud, which type this is. So Davies does what he was trained to do. He feels for the detonator cap, a small threaded cylinder about the size of a whiskey flask. His fingers find it. The threads are clogged with silt. He pulls the small wrench from his belt, positions it carefully, and begins to turn. Nothing happens. The cap does not move. He adjusts his grip and tries again, applying more pressure. The wrench slips. His heart stops. But there is no explosion. No sudden pressure wave. Just the endless black water and the sound of his breathing. He repositions and tries a third time, this time bracing his other hand against the mine casing for leverage. The cap turns. 1 degree. 2 degrees. He keeps the motion slow and steady, counting rotations in his head. 3 full turns and the cap should be loose enough to lift free. But at 2.5 turns there is resistance. Something is caught. He stops. Sweat runs into his eyes inside the helmet. He cannot wipe it away. He takes 3 deep breaths, forcing himself to calm, and then uses his fingertips to explore the edge of the cap. There is a wire. Thin, taut, running from the cap to the housing. Trip wire. If he had pulled the cap free, the wire would have separated and triggered the backup detonator. He would have had perhaps 1 second to realize his mistake before the mine turned him and everything within 50 yards into pink mist. Instead, he reaches for the wire cutters. The handles are slippery. He positions the blades around the wire, trying to hold them steady despite the current and the cold and the shaking in his hands. Then he squeezes. The wire parts with a tiny snap he feels more than hears. He waits. 5 seconds. 10. Still alive. He removes the detonator cap completely and slips it into the waterproof pouch on his belt. The mine is now inert. Probably. Mostly. Unless there is a third safety he did not find. But that is a problem for the disposal team. His job is done. He tugs the lifeline 4 times. Objective complete. Begin ascent. And as he rises through the black water toward the surface, toward air and light, and the world of the living, he allows himself one small moment of relief. On deck, they haul him up and unscrew the helmet. Cold November air hits his face, and he gasps, pulling it into his lungs like a drowning man. His legs are shaking so badly he cannot stand without help. Hayes wraps a wool blanket around his shoulders and presses a tin cup of something hot into his hands. Tea, probably, though it tastes more like boiled copper. How many? Hayes asks. 1, Davies says. Magnetic mine, German make, anti-handling wire trap on the detonator. Neutralized. Needs disposal team for removal. Hayes nods and makes notes on his clipboard. The second diver is already suiting up. There's still half the dock to sweep and only 4 hours until dawn. Davy sits on a crate and lights a cigarette with trembling hands. The tobacco tastes like heaven. Across the pier, someone is singing quietly an old pub song about a girl from Manchester. The melody drifts across the water, absurdly cheerful against the backdrop of ruined buildings and the distant sound of anti-aircraft guns firing at something over the Irish Sea. This is the rhythm of the work. Terror and tedium in equal measure. You go down into the dark. You find the thing that wants to kill you. You make it safe. You come back up. And then someone else takes a turn. And you do it again tomorrow night. And the night after that. Until the harbor is clear, or until your luck runs out, whichever comes first. But there's more to this than fear and cold water. There is the reason they keep going down. Davies thinks about it sometimes, late at night when sleep will not come, and his hands still remember the shape of the detonator cap. He thinks about the merchant sailors he met in a pub 3 months ago, men with faces like weathered leather, who told stories about convoy runs through U-boat-infested waters. They talked about watching ships go down, torpedoed in the middle of the Atlantic, and not being able to stop because stopping meant becoming a target yourself. They talked about floating bodies and burning oil, and the sounds men make when they know they are going to die. And one of them, an old bosun with a Glasgow accent, had gripped Davies' shoulder and said, "What you do matters, lad. Every ship that docks safe because you cleared the harbor, that is lives saved. That is cargo delivered. That is one more punch we get to throw at the bastards." Davies had not known what to say to that. Still does not. But he carries a photograph in the waterproof pouch with the detonator pins. Is creased and salt-stained, but you can still make out the faces. His sister Margaret and her 2 children standing in front of their house in Birmingham. Margaret's husband is in North Africa with the 8th Army. The children are 5 and 7. They write letters in crayon that arrive weeks late and always end with, "When is Uncle Eddie coming home?" He does not know how to answer that either. What he knows is that every mine he pulls from the harbor is one less reason for a ship to sink. One less reason for cargo to be delayed. One less advantage for the enemy. It is not heroic. It is simply necessary. And that in the end is enough. The second diver stays down for 25 minutes. He finds 2 unexploded incendiaries and a damaged depth charge that rolled off a supply ship during the raid. No anti-handling devices on these. Just careful work with the probe rod and some patient digging to expose the housings. When he surfaces, his report is shorter than Davies's, but the exhaustion in his eyes is the same. The third man, Petty Officer Williams, is the oldest of the group. 38, with a wife in London and a son in the Royal Navy somewhere in the Pacific. He has been doing this work since 1941, first in the Thames during the Blitz, then in Plymouth, now here. He has seen things he does not talk about. He goes down without hesitation, methodical and steady, and works his section of the grid with the patience of a man who has learned that rushing gets you killed. He finds a cluster of 3 mines, laid in a triangle pattern designed to create overlapping magnetic fields. A ship passing overhead would have triggered all 3 simultaneously. The blast would have cratered the seafloor and sent a pressure wave strong enough to shatter windows half a mile away. Williams marks the positions with weighted buoys and neutralizes each one in turn, working backwards from the outermost to the center to minimize the risk of a sympathetic detonation. It takes him 40 minutes, 10 minutes past the safe limit for cold water exposure. When they pull him up, his lips are blue, and he cannot speak for several minutes because his jaw is locked from shivering. But the job is done. Dawn breaks over the harbor with pale gray light that reveals the full extent of the damage. Warehouses are skeletal frames of twisted metal. Cranes lean at impossible angles. A freighter lists against a pier, its hull torn open and half flooded. But the water is clear. The dock is safe. At 7 in the morning, a supervisor from the Port Authority arrives with a team of stevedores and crane operators. They look at the cleared section, then at the 3 divers sitting on crates wrapped in blankets, then back at the water. The supervisor nods once. Right then, he says, "Let us get back to work." And just like that, the harbor comes alive again. Winches rattle. Men shout instructions. A cargo ship blows its horn as it maneuvers toward the pier. Somewhere a radio crackles with shipping traffic. The war goes on. And 3 men who spent the night in freezing water feeling for bombs in the mud pack their gear, file their reports, and walk back to the barracks to sleep for a few hours before the next briefing. There are no medals for this. No newsreel cameras. No cheering crowds. Just the knowledge that today, because of what they did in the darkness, ships will dock safely. Cargo will be loaded. Sailors will make it home. And that small, quiet victory is enough. But the cost is real. Williams had a friend once, a diver named Thompson who worked the Thames. Good man. Careful. Experienced. He went down on a routine sweep near Tower Bridge, and his airline got tangled in submerged rubble. By the time they got him free and hauled him up, he had been without air for 4 minutes. He lived, technically, but the brain damage left him unable to walk or speak. His wife visits him in the hospital every Sunday. Williams sends part of his pay to help with the bills. He does not talk about it, but sometimes late at night when the others are asleep, he sits outside the barracks and smokes cigarettes and stares at nothing for hours. Davies understands. They all understand. This is what service looks like when no one is watching. This is the price of keeping the harbor open, of keeping the supply lines running, of making sure that the men on the front lines have ammunition and food and fuel. It is not glorious. It is terrifying and cold, and there's always the knowledge that one mistake, one moment of bad luck, one wire you did not see, and your name goes on a list of casualties that no one outside the service will ever read. But someone has to do it. Someone has to go down into the dark water and find the things that want to explode. Someone has to make the docks safe. And so they do, night after night, port after port, until the job is finished or until they cannot do it anymore. The next mission comes 3 nights later. Different dock, same routine. This time it is Southampton, where a German bomber dropped a string of mines across the main channel during a raid targeting the naval yards. 5 ships are stuck upriver, unable to leave port because the channel is blocked. The Admiralty sends the same 3 divers. They know the water here, have worked it before. They arrive after dark, receive the briefing, and prepare their equipment. The routine is comforting in its familiarity. Check the suit seals. Test the rebreather. Secure the tools. Run through hand signals. Nod to your mates. Go down. The water in Southampton is slightly warmer than Liverpool, but the visibility is worse. Industrial runoff has turned it a murky brown that clings to the faceplate like oil. Davies goes first again. He follows a guide rope from the pier out into the channel, counting his steps, marking distance. At 70 feet the rope ends, and he is on his own. He stands still, letting his breathing settle, and reaches out with his gloved hands. The current is stronger here, pulling west toward the Solent. It tugs at his suit, trying to push him off the marked position. He braces his legs wide and begins to probe. The bottom here is different from Liverpool. Less mud, more hard-packed sand and gravel. Objects stand out more clearly. He finds a bicycle frame, a shipping crate, a tangle of rope and wire. Then something heavier. Metallic. He kneels and runs his hands over it. Cylindrical casing. Stabilizing fins. This is a parachute mine, designed to drift down slowly and settle on the seabed without burying itself. More dangerous in some ways because it sits exposed, magnetic sensors active, waiting for a hull to pass overhead. Davies reaches for the detonator housing and stops. There is something wrong. The casing is warm. Not much, just a few degrees above the surrounding water temperature. But enough to be noticeable. Enough to mean something. A thermal trigger. The mine is not just magnetically activated. It also has a secondary trigger designed to detonate if the surrounding water temperature changes suddenly, like it would if a ship's engine heated the water, or if someone tried to move it to warmer surface water. This is a new development. Intelligence had warned that the Germans were experimenting with multi-trigger designs, but this is the first one Davies has encountered in the field. He tugs the signal line 3 times. Specialist equipment needed. On deck, Hayes swears quietly and makes a radio call. Disposal experts are 2 hours away. Davies is told to mark the location and surface. He ties a weighted marker buoy to the mine's stabilizing fin and begins his ascent. As he rises, he thinks about how quickly the war changes, how the enemy adapts, how the work gets harder. When the specialists arrive, they bring equipment Davies has never seen before. Insulated containment bags, thermal probes, chemical coolant packs. They work with extreme precision, lowering the mine's temperature degree by degree until the thermal trigger is safely below activation threshold. Then they neutralize the magnetic detonator and prepare the mine for removal. The whole process takes 6 hours. But it works. The mine is lifted safely to the surface and transported to a disposal site inland. The channel is clear. Ships can move again. And the divers learn a new trick, add a new danger to the long list of things that can kill them in the dark water. This is how knowledge is built. This is how survival becomes routine. You encounter something new. You figure out how to handle it. You pass the information to other teams. You hope they remember it when their turn comes. And you go back down the next night because the war does not care about your learning curve. But there are moments of light even in this dark work. Small things that remind them why they do it. Williams gets a letter from his son in the Pacific. The boy writes about seeing dolphins racing alongside a ship and about a cook who makes terrible stew but sings beautiful opera. The letter ends with, "Stay safe, Dad," and Williams folds it carefully and keeps it in his pocket when he dives. Davies receives a package from his sister. Inside is a wool scarf she knitted and a drawing from his nephew showing Uncle Eddie fighting monsters underwater. The monsters are drawn with tentacles and sharp teeth. Nothing like the real threats Davies faces, but the sentiment is there. He is a hero to a 7-year-old who cannot possibly understand what that means. He pins the drawing above his bunk. And one night, after a particularly brutal shift, when they have pulled 4 mines from Plymouth Harbor and Davies' hands are so cold he cannot feel his fingers, a group of merchant sailors buy them drinks at a dockside pub. No speeches, no grand gestures, just pints of bitter beer and quiet nods of thanks. One sailor, an old Norwegian with scars on his face from a torpedo blast, leans close and says in broken English, "I take my ship through your cleared water. My crew make it home. You are good men." And somehow that simple acknowledgement from a man who has seen his own share of hell means more than any medal could. Because he understands. He knows what the darkness costs. The work continues through the winter. December brings snow and ice that forms along the pier pilings and makes the already treacherous descent even more dangerous. January brings storms that churn the harbor water into a freezing soup of debris and chemicals. February brings news that the war in Europe is turning. The Allies are pushing into Germany. Victory seems possible for the first time. But the mines keep coming. German bombers, increasingly desperate, drop everything they have on British ports. Magnetic mines. Acoustic mines. Pressure mines that detonate when a ship's wake changes water pressure above them. The divers adapt. They learn to recognize each type by touch. They develop new techniques for neutralization. They trade information with teams working other ports. A network of knowledge grows, passed along through official channels and unofficial conversations over pints in dockside pubs. This is how you handle a pressure mine. This is the sound an acoustic trigger makes if you tap the casing. This is how you tell if the housing has been damaged by impact and might be unstable. Lives are saved by these small exchanges of information. And lives are lost when the information arrives too late. In March, a team working Cardiff reports a new threat. Mines fitted with multiple detonators, each requiring separate neutralization. The first diver reaches the mine, disables what he thinks is the primary trigger, and signals success. As the surface team begins winching the mine up, the secondary trigger activates. The blast kills the diver instantly and severely injures 2 men on deck. The mine, it turns out, had a trembler switch designed to detonate if moved before all triggers were disabled. The information is immediately circulated to all port clearance teams. Look for redundant housings. Check for movement sensors. Assume multiple triggers unless proven otherwise. Davies receives the bulletin and adds it to his mental checklist. The list is getting long. Too long. Sometimes he lies awake at night running through it, making sure he has not forgotten anything, because forgetting gets you killed. Williams tells him not to think too hard. It makes you slow, he says. Down there, you need to trust your hands. Trust your training. Thinking too much gets you tangled up. So Davies tries to find the balance. Enough thought to stay careful. Enough instinct to stay quick is a hard line to walk, but it is the line that keeps you alive. April brings better news. The war is ending. Germany is collapsing. Hitler is dead. The bombing raids stop. For the first time in years, British ports can operate without fear of air attack. But the work is not finished. There are still mines in the water. Dozens of them, maybe hundreds. Laid over 5 years of war, some buried deep in mud, some lodged in wreckage, some simply waiting in the darkness for their sensors to detect a passing ship. The clearance teams are given a new mission. Total sweep. Every major port on the south coast needs to be cleared completely before civilian shipping can resume. It will take months, maybe years, but it needs to be done. So they keep diving. Davies, Williams, and the others work their way along the coast. Portsmouth, Brighton, Dover. Each port is different. Each bottom holds its own secrets. In Portsmouth, they find a mine so corroded that the detonator housing crumbles when Davies tries to remove it. He backs away slowly, marks it for explosive disposal, and moves on. In Brighton, they discover an entire ammunition dump that rolled off a transport ship during a storm. 300 pounds of high-explosive shells scattered across the seafloor like deadly marbles. It takes a week to clear. In Dover, they work in water so shallow that at low tide their helmets break the surface and they can hear gulls crying overhead. The work is endless, exhausting, but there is a difference now. No more bombers overhead. No more raids. No more fear that tonight's mission might be interrupted by falling bombs. Just the steady, methodical process of making the water safe again. In June, 6 months after the war in Europe ended, Davies pulls his last mine from Southampton Harbor. It is a small one, a German LMB magnetic mine that was probably dropped during the final days of the war. He locates it, disables it, and marks it for removal. As he surfaces, he realizes this might be it. The end of his war. The Admiralty is already talking about demobilization. Divers will be reassigned to peacetime duties or released from service. Williams has already received his discharge papers. He is going back to London, back to his wife, back to whatever civilian life looks like now. Davies does not know what he will do. Go back to Birmingham, probably. Help his sister. Find work. Try to forget what it felt like to kneel in freezing mud with your hands on a bomb that could kill you in an instant. But he knows he will never fully forget. None of them will. This work has marked them in ways that will not wash off. They have seen the darkness. They have touched death. They have made impossible choices under impossible pressure. And they will carry that with them forever. But they will also carry something else. The knowledge that they did something that mattered. That their courage, quiet and unglamorous as it was, helped win the war. That ships sailed because they cleared the water. That men lived because they took the risks. That is enough. It has to be. The final day comes in late June. The 3 divers stand on the dock at Southampton, their equipment packed, their orders complete. Hayes shakes their hands and tells them they did good work. Exemplary work. The king himself has sent a commendation, though no medals because the work was classified. They nod and thank him, and do not mention that they do not care about medals. What they did was never about recognition. It was about the job. About making the docks safe. About serving. Hayes understands. He has been with them from the beginning. He knows what they went through. He promises to write recommendations for civilian employment. Promises to stay in touch. Promises that if they ever need anything they should reach out. Then he salutes and walks away, leaving them alone on the pier. The 3 men stand in silence for a moment, looking out at the harbor. The water is calm. Ships move in and out without incident. Cranes lift cargo. Stevedores shout instructions. Life goes on, and somewhere below the surface, the seafloor is clear. Safe. Ready for whatever comes next. Williams lights a cigarette and passes the pack. They smoke in silence, watching the sun set over the Solent. Then they shoulder their bags and walk away from the water, back into the world, carrying their stories with them into the peace. But this is not just their story. This is the story of every diver who went down into the dark water during the war. Every man who felt through mud for hidden death. Every specialist who neutralized a threat no one else would see. They worked in dozens of ports across Britain. Liverpool, Glasgow, Belfast, Cardiff, Plymouth, Portsmouth, London. Every major harbor had clearance teams. Every team had men who went into the black water night after night. Some came back. Some did not. Their names are in archives now, lists of casualties and commendations that few people read. But their work is visible every day in the ships that still dock safely in British ports, in the cargo that still moves through channels they cleared, in the harbors that still function because someone 70 years ago was brave enough to kneel in freezing mud and disarm a bomb in the dark. That is their legacy. Not medals, not fame, just the quiet knowledge that they did something impossible and did it well. And if you have stayed with us through this entire story, if you have felt even a fraction of what these men felt, then you understand why their story needs to be told. These were not Hollywood heroes. They were ordinary men who did extraordinary things because someone had to, because the alternative was unthinkable. Because courage is not about being fearless. It is about being terrified and doing the job anyway. So if this story has moved you, if you want to hear more stories like this, stories about real people who shaped history in ways that never made the headlines, then do not just watch and walk away. Subscribe to this channel right now. Hit that notification bell. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Because these stories matter. These men matter. And the only way their sacrifices are remembered is if we choose to remember them. Click that subscribe button below this video. Join us as we continue to uncover the forgotten heroes of history. The men and women who worked in darkness so others could live in light. The stories that history almost lost but that we are determined to preserve. Subscribe now. Because their story, like the story of Davies and Williams and every diver who cleared the harbors, deserves to be told. Thank you for watching. And thank you for remembering.